Would you believe me if I told you that there was an obscure RPG filled with magic, swords, humans, gnomes, elves, and a massive open world, where the fate of all mortal life rests on the shoulders of one mysterious fellow, you, and that the decisions you make along the way shape and rearrange the threads of fate? It's kind of hard to believe that such a game would exist and fly under the radar of the majority of gamers, since this game never became popular and wasn't really talked about that much at all. Enter Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, or Re-Reckoning for that matter. Before we dive into the game and its details though, it might be best to get a little context around why this game was so controversial and obscure in the first place. Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning is an action RPG developed by Big Huge Games and published by 38 Studios back in 2012. Its production began during 2009 under supervision of 38 Studios founder Kurt Schilling and American writer R.A. Salvatore, well known for his work on The Legend of Drizzt and the Demon War saga. The game was originally made to introduce the Amalur universe for their planned MMORPG named Project Copernicus, but then became its own standalone project. To further get a scope of how much of a big deal this game was supposed to be, notable figures in the industry pitched in with its development, namely Todd McFarlane, Ken Rolston, and Grant Kirkhope. So what made it so controversial? Well, with the amount of ambition that Schilling was willing to pour into this game, the cost of its production would have to match. Schilling spoke with the Rhode Island Board of Economic Development to secure a whopping $75 million to fund the project. All lights were green and development started. Fast forward to release day, and Reckoning needed to sell 3 million copies of the game in 90 days to break even, but only managed around half of that. Great numbers for any game, just not for this one. Debts went unpaid, employee payments missed, and Rhode Island even sued Schilling for squandering the money lent to him. All this controversy over this development and release, and the game that came out of it was actually fine. It has its issues, which we'll discuss soon, but it works, and has a satisfactory amount of polish to it. Nothing innovative to the genre, just a good game all around, but personally disappointing playing it today. Now that you know the story behind this game, we'll be diving into Kaiko and THQ Nordic's remastered version of the game that came out in 2020, Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning. I actually played the original version of the game, and while I never really finished it back then, both versions of the game played similarly in terms of technicality. No changes to the story were made, and while there were minor balance updates made to the game, nothing really stood out to me as different from my original experience. Take note, I never finished the game back then, but for Re-Reckoning, I did. Now the question is, should you? First, we're going to talk about what this game does well. The introductory cutscene does a good job at introducing the world and its inhabitants. The lore seems fleshed out, and you get a good sense of scale and context on what the game is about to throw at you. That gives it a plus for storytelling, which carries over through all the cutscenes in the game. The story basically starts as the Fae, this game's version of elves, have some kind of civil war, with Gadflo, the big bad, a member of the Fae High Council, killing all the other members while possessing some mysterious power that he believes was obtained through a new god. Using this power, he waged war on all mortal life in Amalur, and is slowly but surely winning, since Fae in this world don't permanently die, but return to some kind of cycle only to be reborn again. The war has been continuing for some 10 years, and you die in one of the many battles that take place. The game then starts as two gnomes carry your lifeless body along a corridor to be tossed with the seemingly infinite number of dead bodies present in this unknown place. While being carried around, the game lets you choose your race, customize how your character looks, and choose your name. There aren't any sliders in the character creation to fine-tune how you customize your hero, and the choices presented are lackluster. To be honest, I found the choice of race limiting as well. My favorite race in fantasy games are dwarves, and it was just sad that I couldn't play as one or something close to it in this universe. As this game is originally 11 years old now, I'd say it gets a pass for the character creation. Your body gets tossed down a chute and you wake up in a pile of corpses. This is where the game's tutorial starts, and soon you realize that the cave is under attack by the Tuatha. The tutorial is simple enough. The game introduces its mechanics to you as you explore the cave through text boxes popping up with instructions. The game's movement and combat feel fluid, and you can sense the gameplay has gone through a good amount of polish. Further exploring the cave, you find out that this is a laboratory called the Well of Souls, where research was being done to find a way to resurrect mortals. Not only that, but you are its only success, meaning you're the only mortal that was brought back to life through the well's function, though nobody can explain why. Fighting through the laboratory, you come across the final obstacle, a troll. Here, the game introduces its unique mechanic, Reckoning Mode. While in Reckoning Mode, time slows down and you become much stronger. Defeating enemies in this state leaves them stunned, with the threads of fate seemingly flowing out of their bodies. Pressing F on a defeated enemy starts a God of War-like execution that varies based on the enemy, and a quick time event that allows you to gain bonus experience for the final blow. All enemies stunned in this state are defeated after finishing an execution, and Reckoning Mode ends. Experiencing this for the first time gave me a bit of a rush. The power fantasy of being able to slow down time and seemingly manipulate the threads of fate of my enemies and finishing them all off at the same time was really satisfying. And so you defeat the troll and you exit the laboratory. You're greeted with a bright, high fantasy forest with huge trees and rays of sunlight penetrating the canopy, a stark contrast to the dark and gloomy cave you were just in. The game now opens up and you're free to explore. The introduction of the game was well made and really gets you going and excited to explore the world after, but before we get any further, let's discuss the combat that you just experienced. Combat is rather simple. You can equip 2 weapons at a time and switch between them freely, along with 10 slots for spells. There are 9 weapons to choose from: daggers, bow, feyblade, staff, scepter, chakram, longsword, greatsword, and hammer. Any one of these can go into the primary or secondary weapon slots. All weapons have their own moveset, and some work better paired with others. They each have a basic moveset that you know from the beginning, and you unlock other moves as you level up. If you noticed, these weapons fall into 3 distinct categories: finesse, sorcery, and might, which also serves as the game's skill trees. Leveling up gives you 3 points to allocate anywhere you want in these trees, unlocking passive and active skills as well as weapon movesets. Reaching a certain number of points invested unlocks destinies, which are this game's version of classes. Destinies give passive buffs which influence your playstyle and may be changed every time you level up, or when visiting a Fate Weaver, which allows you to reset your character and reallocate your points. Nothing really new about this progression system. It works well for this game and meshes well with the story. So far so good for Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning. Now we move to the map and map exploration. Re-Reckoning is an open world game, so you can expect to spend a good amount of time exploring the landscape. There are 5 regions in this game, each with a good number of sub-regions and locations within them to satisfy the explorer within. If you're wondering if this game has content, this game has content. You explore the world by running around and discovering points of interest just like you would in Skyrim. Doing so allows you to fast travel to that place as long as you're in the overworld. Each region has a distinct style, and in some cases, notable landmarks on the map can be seen from afar while exploring the overworld. Navigating the map for the first few hours was a joy, since I was constantly finding new places, enemies to defeat, and treasure to loot. Now I think I've said all the good points I wanted to say about the game. Now it's time for the real talk. Unfortunately, for everything this game seems to do right, it does something wrong to ruin it. While I did say that the cutscenes are great and are the best part of the storytelling of this game, there are extremely noticeable moments where the audio is just missing. Now take a look at these cutscenes.
This ends here!
They do such a good job at building up momentum in these, only to have it crash and fall short of amazing with failed sound design. Audio is a core part of the immersion in these games, and checking all the boxes except the sound made it a total waste to me. Now of course, if this is an isolated case, please do let me know. If you guys don't have any missing audio in your cutscenes, maybe I have to repair some of the files in my game. Just let me know in the comment section below. The story, while cohesive, is nothing new. This is to be expected since there's only so many ways you can combine elements to make a plot. You're the chosen one, the fateless one, the only one who has escaped the chains of fate and can do with them as he pleases. All this emphasis on you being able to change the world, and yet I never felt like my choices mattered as much as they should have. You get the option to choose dialogue during interactions with NPCs, but there's no relationship building with any of them. No romance options, no life sim-like interactions with them. It made me feel like the story only had one way to go and it didn't matter what I did in the game. There is a persuasion skill in the game that gives you another outcome which would otherwise be impossible to take, but the effect of succeeding with these barely changes the world and the story looking at the big picture. You go across the land, rumors are spread about you, notable people in the great cities of Amalur know of you, you gain titles such as the new ruler of the House of Ballads, true sworn of the Warsworn faction, arch-magus of the Scholia Arcana, and the best of a band of thieves called the Travelers, and even more. Yet your achievements aren't felt in the world and everything feels bland. The best thing about these twists of fate, as the game calls them, are the small buffs that they provide to the progression of your character. Speaking of progression, it feels really slow in Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning. You either progress through levels or through gear. Leveling grants you 3 points to invest in trees and 1 point to invest in abilities, which are your out-of-combat skills. The stats given for any singular level are very minuscule, and the 3 skill trees given don't really branch out or give you a feeling of, oh, I want to use that skill, or I want to get this skill, or something like that. Gear progression is the fastest way you'll see your character getting stronger. Before getting any good gear, you'll have to go through tens of trash gear that you'll either sell, destroy, or salvage for crafting components, and with the limited inventory slots you have, you'll find yourself fast traveling to a store or a smithy often, which breaks the flow of gameplay. The chance of finding unique gear, which are purple, and set piece gear, which are yellow, seems very arbitrary as well. You'll find them after beating notable bosses in the main quest line or after the end of a long side quest, but you'll also find them randomly tucked into the pockets of a Bogart or a Mergen, sometimes even under a random pile of rocks out in the overworld. This made me feel like I needed to check every chest, every pile of stone, every dead body for a chance to get good gear, only to be countlessly disappointed with the amount of trash loot I got. Even in the cases I do get the purple and yellow gear, my crafted weapons would almost always be stronger, so it didn't matter at some point in the game. In my opinion, they should have made the higher rarity gear as rewards for quests or found with notable NPCs, rather than arbitrarily scattering them all around, and they should have made them a bit stronger. They do get a plus for their unique models though. Combat feels fluid and polished, but it also gets repetitive really fast. You can unlock new moves for your weapons, but ultimately the total number of moves a weapon has is very limited. This is further limited by the weapons being tied to certain skill trees, meaning if you spec into the might skill tree, your most effective weapons would be the longsword, greatsword, and hammer. Sure, you could still use the other weapons, but why put yourself in a disadvantage like that? The game does have destinies that make use of 2 skill trees and even 3, but it doesn't make up for the repetition of moves you'll be doing over the course of the game, and this game can get long if you let it. Enemy variety, map design, and bosses are also at a low in this game. Once you've gone into the 10 to 15 hour mark, you've seen it all. And I finished the game in 60 hours. Imagine discovering nothing new for 75% of the time you're playing the game. Visiting new zones and regions introduce 1 or 2 new enemies, but most of the time they're just reskins, recolors, or just have a different name showing on top of their heads. Dungeon entrances and interiors are reused wildly over the course of the entire game, and bosses are often just beefed up versions of normal enemies with no new movesets. The best bosses in the game are the ones that come with the Dead Kel and Teeth of Naros DLC, plus the main storyline's midpoint boss and the final boss, a whopping total of 4 unique bosses. As a final point into the progression issues of the game, although this one is minor compared to the others, the max level you can get is level 40, meaning you won't be able to max out all the abilities and skill trees. This is good since it makes you think about what playstyle you want, and it's also not a big deal since you can respec anyway. But why does the experience bar still show the needed experience to reach level 41 despite not gaining any more experience? It just made me think if this game was intended to be longer originally. Now we talk about exploration. During the first 10 to 15 hours of the game that you're actually discovering something new, it feels really good to explore. After this, it gets tedious since the only mode of travel around this vast world is either fast travel or your legs. And fast traveling requires you to have already visited that place once. This wouldn't have been a problem if the game added a faster way to travel, like maybe a horse? Are you telling me that you have a fleshed out history of Amalur, countless books, describing the lore of the universe and its inhabitants, epic questlines about magic, war, gods, and fate, and yet couldn't add a single damn horse? And that's just a huge L on their part right there, no excuses. Also, the number of landmarks in each zone after leaving Dalentarth were less, making exploration that much more boring since you were seeing less unique places to explore. Final note on the exploration, and this killed my enthusiasm of exploration once I figured it out, is that most if not all areas in the game are tied to a quest. Meaning if you discover a dungeon and explore it, chances are you'll accept a quest later on in that zone that will lead you back to that dungeon, making you run the entirety of the dungeon's length again, but this time it's already empty since you already cleared it out the first time and the mobs haven't respawned yet. This meant that the best way to explore for me was to unlock all the areas in the zone for fast travel, accept all quests I came across in that zone, and then fast travel to each dungeon to finish all the quests I had. This was further reinforced by the bad map design of the dungeons in this game, where it wouldn't loop back to the entrance, meaning you had to run all the way back to exit in most cases, since fast travel only works in the overworld. Again, another huge L for the game here. For all the good and bad I've stated about the game, I think the game is average at best. The story was good and the combat works and feels polished, but the best parts of the game are the beginning and the end of the game. The fluff in the middle just made it such a chore to play the game, and I think it would have benefited from a more linear gameplay style. Re-Reckoning does come with DLC, namely Teeth of Naros and Dead Kel, and these are so much better than 75% of the base game. New enemies, a great storyline for each of them, and a more linear experience. If you can't bring yourself to finish the base game, at least try the DLCs first. Looking back, most of the negative experiences I had within the 60 hours I sunk into this game were barely saved by the main storyline. Though I personally think it would have been better if character relations and your choices actually mattered. The story was epic and the ending was satisfying enough. And if the game came out with more emphasis on the story and a linear experience, I would bring myself to recommend this game to you. Unfortunately, that is not the case with Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning. After beating the game, you're free to explore the world and do the quests you haven't finished yet, but beyond that, there's nothing more to do. Replayability for me is non-existent for this game, as I would dread to have to explore this world again the way it is, even with all my gear and levels carried over. Now, is Kingdoms of Amalur Re-Reckoning worth playing in 2023? I have to give it a no. The best I can do, if I absolutely have to recommend it, is to play it and just make a beeline for the main and faction quests. Thanks for sticking around till the end. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of my game reviews. This time I tried a different structure to my script and deviated from my previous videos. Let me know if you like the new structure or have any suggestions. I'd love to read your criticisms in the comments below. Also, what should I review next? I'm thinking The Surge, Dragon Age 2, or Pillars of Eternity 2. What do you think? Thanks again, and have a great day ahead.